In the type 1 diabetic community, there is an ingredient in your food that for half of us is wrecking our blood sugars and causing mysterious fluctuations. And for the other half of us, it's actually fixing your blood sugars and actually making life easier. So what I want to distinguish between today is to help you understand what that ingredient is, how to avoid having it wreck your blood sugars, and how to use it intentionally to manipulate your blood sugars for an easier, simpler time managing blood sugars day to day. Doesn't that sound nice? Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Matt Van de Vecht. I'm a certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist, which is going to come in key for today. But I'm also the author of a best-selling book that I'm pulling today's lesson from. That if you haven't read the book yet, you're going to want to grab it. It's called The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula. You can grab it on Amazon right now while you're watching this episode. But today I'm going to break down one of our top rated hacks or tips for blood sugar management, how to avoid the post-meal spike, even with fun foods. So join me today as we experiment with something new, this ingredient that could single-handedly improve your A1C, your time in range, and your relationship with food. Let's dive in. I don't drink anymore, but I used to drink a lot more than I do now, which I guess by definition could mean a single drink. But in college, there were some times where I had questionable amounts of alcohol. And in that period of time in my life, I came to the realization that hangovers do happen and when you have too much fun, and that drinking itself actually kind of felt like I was borrowing happiness from the next day. Bear with me as I break this down. See, and by the way, today's episode is not about alcohol. This is just a story. But I realized that alcohol seemed to make things more fun than it would without it, right? You're looser. It's just a grand time. But when you wake up the next day, there is oftentimes difficulty in getting out of bed, in feeling like yourself, and having motivation to do anything. So what I came to realize was the more I drink, the more happiness I'm borrowing from the next day. And so I am happier now, but then I'm miserable the next morning, hence the hangover, right? And while that, of course, is somewhat made up, it's also a great example of what we're going to explore today, which is borrowing stable blood sugars from the future, and how some of you went a little overboard when you found this quote-unquote hack to stable blood sugars, and it ended up creating a new problem. See, if you haven't figured it out yet, what I am talking about, what would help you to avoid a potential spike from carbohydrates is proteins and fats. So proteins and fats are the other two macronutrients that make up our food, right? And so I'm going to get into the nutritionist side of myself for a minute. See, everything you eat is comprised of three macronutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. That's it. It's pretty simple. Sometimes foods are mostly just one. If you think about rice, it's basically all just carbs, right? Think about egg whites. That's basically all just protein. You think about olive oil. That's basically just fat, right? But most foods, especially when we combine foods to make delicious things, might have components from all three. In fact, it's pretty common. So what ends up happening is that carbohydrates spike blood glucose, right? And when we're delivering insulin manually, when our pancreas is broken, like mine is, it makes it a little bit more difficult for us to get through a meal without a post-blood glucose spike. Ugh. How about we just say postprandial and just go all sciencey, right? The blood sugar spike at the end of a meal. You want to avoid that, so we try to manipulate our insulin delivery. This is where the pre-bolus comes into play, right? So if you haven't heard about this, if you take fast-acting insulin like I do, you might have been told to take your insulin 10 to 15 minutes before you introduce carbohydrates. What you're trying to do here, and the timing of this is your best shot, shot, no pun intended, is to match the timing of the insulin with the digestion of your food. That's the goal, right? So we're giving insulin a 10 to 15 minute head start before carbohydrates are introduced because carbs impact blood sugars pretty fast. Now, previously, and incorrectly, most people were taught, and myself included, we were taught that proteins and fats don't impact blood sugars at all. That is false. It is completely false. They do impact blood sugars. It just takes a lot longer. And see, the issue is that we do understand that proteins and fats can delay digestion or make other foods digest slower. And they both do so in their own respect. Fats, as an example, delay gastric emptying. So they delay the stomach emptying the contents into your small intestine. So because it delays the gastric emptying of the foods, that means it delays the impact of carbohydrates on your blood sugars. In other words, if I eat rice by itself, I will see a spike in blood sugars. Assuming all other variables are constant, if I have rice with a ton of melted butter and avocado and maybe a fried egg, my blood sugars will be much more stable. This is because the fat in the egg and the avocado and the butter is going to slow down the rice from getting through my stomach into my small intestine, where it's absorbed into the bloodstream and impacts my blood glucose, which is literally the glucose or sugar in your blood, right? So all that to say, we've previously been taught fats and proteins don't impact blood sugars, but they do. However, they can be helpful in avoiding the post-meal spike to a certain degree. And this is where I get into my example with the alcohol. See, fats and proteins allow us to borrow stable blood sugars from the future and have them now. So what you might notice in a meal that has carbs, but also higher fats and proteins, is that you have really nice blood sugars at first. And then as time goes on, they start creeping up and up and up. And then you give a little bit of extra insulin because it's starting to go a little higher than you'd like, but they still go up and up. And you're like, what the heck? And you give some more insulin and they go up and up. And you're like, why doesn't diabetes make any sense anymore? It does make sense. You just were ignorant of the things having an impact on your blood sugars. You were told incorrectly that fats and proteins have no impact, when the reality is you're seeing a delayed impact from the carbohydrates, and you're seeing an impact from fats and proteins. See, fats independently will increase insulin resistance. So they don't directly need insulin because they aren't converted into glucose, but it will make you more resistant to insulin. So it indirectly causes an increased need of insulin, especially if you're having carbohydrates. See, if you have too much fat content, it makes you more resistant to the insulin, which you need for the carbs, which means when you have carbs, you're more likely to spike, right? And so you need more insulin for the carbs that you have, not because carbs are evil, but because fats made you more resistant to insulin that you needed to take for the carbs. Indirect relationship, but still equally as important, is going to be the protein ratio. See, proteins actually convert into glucose, but not at 100%. So if you have 30 grams of protein, as an example, you're not going to see a perfect conversion to a 30-gram amount of glucose in your bloodstream as you would if you had carbs, right? Carbs, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. You eat 30 grams of glucose or carbohydrates, it turns into glucose, 1-to-1 ratio. But with proteins, yes, it converts to glucose, but usually it's about 30 to 50% of the total content, right? So if I have 30 grams of protein, I might only need to consider about 10 to 15 grams as if it were glucose. However, it is on a significantly delayed timeline, which means the proteins that I consume, I don't need to pre-bolus for, but I might need to post-bolus for. In other words, I might need to take insulin an hour or 2 hours or beyond after I've eaten the meal. So when we combine the macronutrients, it's not a question of which ones are going to impact blood sugars. They all impact blood sugars, but depending on the concentration and the amounts of those macronutrients, I need to adjust my dosing strategy. See how this is an art form as much as it is a science. So if I have a high carb meal, I need more insulin up front. If I have a high protein or a high fat meal, I might need insulin later on. If I have high carb, high fat, high protein, I'm going to need insulin all over the place, right? It's going to be a nightmare if I don't really tackle this thing. But there are numerous situations where proteins and fats can bite you in the butt. Number one, most common, is that people hear that fats and proteins slow down the digestion of the carbs and they help to reduce the post-meal spike, which is ideal, right? So you're like, okay, I'll just add fats and proteins to everything. Well, the unfortunate part is that fats have this snowball effect where if you keep consuming more and more fats meal after meal after meal, by the end of the day, you're enormously insulin resistant, and you've probably seen this with your overnight blood sugars just getting stuck in a higher number that you don't want, right? Because that impacts sleep quality and recovery and brain health and muscle growth and all these things. It's just a ridiculous snowball effect. But the other side of this impact that people also don't consider is if it's really high fat and high protein. That means it'll slow down the digestion, not only of your mealtime carbohydrates, but also of any low treatments that you consume. See, this has gotten me personally a few times, and it's a little bit scary because if you have a high fat, high protein snack and somehow you end up going low in the next hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you're going to have a treat, 10, 15 grams of glucose to fix the low blood sugar, right? But because of the high fat content, delaying gastric emptying or delaying your stomach from releasing that contents into your small intestine, your low is not going to come up as fast as it typically does. So you might have 15 carbs, wait 15 minutes, and nothing happens. You're still low. So you have 15 more carbs, wait 15 more minutes, nothing happens. And you're like, oh no, this is bad. What do I do, right? And panic and anxiety aside, because I've experienced that too, you eventually come back up because the fats don't stop gastric emptying. They don't stop digestion, but they slow it down. So what ends up happening is you've got all these carbs that you added in that are slowly going through your stomach until they all hit your bloodstream at once. And you're like, why am I 400, right? This is a nightmare. This is becoming a challenge. So on both sides of the equation, fats and proteins will slow down the digestion of your carbs, but that might be helpful, that might be harmful. And the trick is to plan ahead, to strategize for these moments and use it intentionally. Now, before I go any deeper down that rabbit hole, as much as I love geeking out about the sciencey and math side of diabetes, I recognize not everybody wants that, right? But for those of you who do, I actually had a chat with the team and we have this resource, this training that previously was only for my private clients. We did this masterclass a while back that I really just went to town on everything you would need to know to manipulate blood sugars for the fun foods, right? So how do you assess blood sugars? How do you make adjustments in your insulin dosing strategies? How do you see food differently and think differently? Actually, it's on my t-shirt, right? Think differently. How do you do that in a way that allows you to actually have freedom and flexibility in your food choices to where you can go have the pasta, the pizza, the burger, whatever is on the menu for Friday night out with your friends or with your family without sacrificing your blood sugar control. So if that's something that you would value, going deeper on these topics to get true control over your blood sugars, we'll tell you what we'll do. We're going to have you comment down below. I want you to type the word Masterclass so that my team knows to come back here and comment instructions on how you can get access to that for free, even though previously it's only been available for my paid clients. So I want to make sure you guys get access to that because I want to make sure you are supported in this journey towards blood sugar control. So comment the word Masterclass, and I would also like to know your favorite type of food. Like, what would you use that Masterclass for if you could have any food with perfect blood sugars and not have to worry about them? What's that meal look like for you? So just type the word Masterclass, drop that in there, and we'll show you how to get access to it, even though it is in our private community, and that'll get you access to it as well. Now, the second piece of this, in that community, we had a lot of clients reach out about my book, which we'll put on screen real quick, The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula. A lot of you have already gotten it, left reviews that are glowing. It's amazing. I am so thankful for all of you guys doing that. But I've received quite a few emails and notifications in our private community, people saying, I can't wait to read it. I just haven't found the time to do it yet. And so we realize this is a common thing. People buy books and they never read them. So in order to help you to extract maximum value from that book, to actually learn the lessons that I spent a decade putting together for you guys, we're actually going to do something really special you've never done before. I am going to do a read-along journey with everyone in our private community. So if you get access to that masterclass, you'll be in there. If you've bought the book, you'll be in there. And this read-along experience is going to be me going through the book with you and answering questions live every week. So we're going to do this. It's going to be a ton of fun. And ultimately, it's because I want you to pull the most out of that book and this is the only time I'll be doing it live. This is, of course, if you're worried about missing it live, if you're watching this video and it's a year later, we are going to record them and archive them so that everyone who purchases the book will have access to these moving forward. So that being said, either if you've got the book or if you just heard about it today and you're going to buy it right now, we're going to do a live walkthrough. This is the only time you'll have an opportunity to go through the book with the author himself and ask questions to the author in case you want to go deeper on any topics or have clarifying questions, or really just to get the most personalized experience from that. So I'm super pumped about it. All you have to do right now is, if you don't have the book yet, go get it. Okay, it's called The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula on Amazon. And spoiler alert, today's topic of fats and proteins, how they impact blood sugars, how you can manipulate them, I actually pulled it directly from the book. And so we're going to be going a lot deeper into these concepts, because in video, I'll be able to talk through them a lot more. But if you haven't yet, go grab the book. We're going to notify everyone who's accessed the materials in the book. So once you buy it, there's a link you can use in there to access all the bonuses. And once you activate those bonuses, tells us how we can contact you, and we'll be able to get you access to this live walkthrough as well as the Q&A. So before we jump in, that's the last thing I wanted to mention. If you want access to the Masterclass, that's my gift to you. So just comment the word Masterclass and what meal you want to use it for. And my team will reach out to you. Make sure you have notifications turned on, you're subscribed and all that stuff, so that you actually get notified when my team tells you how to get access to it. And then number 2, if you don't have the book, go grab it real quick and get your butt into our community so we can get you access to that walkthrough. I think it's going to be a ton of fun to do a read along with you guys and actually interact with you. So the Blood Sugar Freedom Formula, grab the book ASAP, because we're starting it up really soon. Now, back to today's lesson, and what you want to hear about is avoiding these post-blood sugar spikes, or post-meal blood sugar spikes. Best thing you can do is find balance, okay? Find balance and then personalize your formulas to these independent situations. There is no perfect calculation for every meal, because every meal looks different. Not just the food, but also the situation. Did you just finish a workout? Did you just wake up? Have you not slept in 2 days because you've got a toddler who is refusing to sleep for some reason? Yep, personal example. There's a number of things that can influence your blood sugars: your pre-bolus time, your insulin to carb ratio, insulin to protein ratio, insulin to fat resistance ratio. All these things come together. It sounds crazy complicated, and that's because it is, but that's also why the subtitle of my book is Type 1 Diabetes Simplified. Like, that's my goal for you, is for diabetes to just make sense, right? So that you're confident in how you can control it as you regain freedom and flexibility in your life. So when we think about proteins and fats, should they be used? Is this ingredient wrecking you or helping you? It's going to do both. Okay, and it's your job to assess each meal independently and put your thinking cap on and go, okay, is more fat and protein a good thing or a bad thing? And how do I adjust my strategies for manipulating blood sugars based on what I want my outcomes to be? Prime example, sometimes I add extra protein to a meal and I don't take insulin for the protein because I want a delayed rise in blood sugars. Great example of this, I just finished up one of my last Ironman races, and during Ironman training, I actually want blood sugars to ride just a little bit higher, right? I might aim for 130, 150. And in order to get it there, I want stable blood sugars for the first hour or two while I'm sitting at my desk. But then when I hop up to go on a bike ride or a run or a swim, I want my blood sugars to naturally start to cruise upwards, so that as I exercise, they naturally cruise back downwards and I end perfectly. Now, it's not always perfect, all right? I'll be the first to admit I also mess up sometimes. I am human. But the more you know, the more you're able to intentionally manipulate blood sugars with the right strategies. So now that you know what proteins and fats do, you know you can use them to avoid a big spike from carbs, but you should also know that once you pass a certain threshold, if you're on your 4th steak for the night, it's gonna come back to haunt you in a couple hours. So just being ready for that, knowing how to handle it, doesn't mean you can't have 4 steaks, all right? It just means you got to approach that meal a little bit differently than it would be if you had just 1 steak and potatoes, right? So yes, proteins and fats do impact blood sugars. They can be incredibly helpful in avoiding post-meal spikes from carbs, but if you have too much of the proteins and fats, you might have to consider swinging back around a second time or a third time and beyond, depending on how much you had, with a little extra insulin to help it out. Now, this is not medical advice. I invite you to do your own research. And of course, if there is a way that I can help you with any of this stuff, feel free to reach out. But the best way to get connected, to get plugged in, and to extract the most value and the best tips and tricks for your life, definitely going to be commenting the word Masterclass with your favorite meal, and then going to get the book, The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula, so you can join us on the read along with myself as I answer your questions while we're going through it together. All right, so go grab the Blood Sugar Freedom Formula on Amazon. I will see you guys, most of you, in the Q&As and the live trainings that we'll be doing in the community. I'm so pumped about it. Get out there, intentionally live your life. Use these blood sugar strategies to find true freedom and flexibility as you live your best life. Hope it was helpful. I'll see you guys in the trainings, and keep up the fight. All right, because you stuck around, this is my new favorite thing to do. For those of you who stay for the full episode, we got extra bonus tip at the end of these ones. You ready for this? The delayed rise from fats and proteins that many of us have experienced, but maybe not known why. Endocrinologists, dietitians, doctors, they all see this too, but they don't know why. And what they've done to fix this, and they did this to me many years ago, is they may up your basal insulin or your long-acting insulin in an effort to combat the delayed rise, because they associate a rise that happens many hours after a meal with your basal or your long-acting insulin because it's too far away from the meal for that to be the food. That's incorrect, right? They're looking at carbohydrate content only. Carbs typically will impact blood sugars for 1 to 3 hours, right? And then they're gone, they're used. It's a quick-based fuel, but fats and proteins digest much slower. So when the spike happens 2, 3, 4 hours later, they forget that food can do that and instead blame the long-acting or your basal insulin, leading to an increase that just didn't need to happen. And for a lot of people that I've worked with, sometimes this can get as bad as double or triple the amount of background insulin, and it can lead to lows that are unexplained overnight and in between meals. So find the root cause, get curious, and think differently. I hope that helps. I'll see you in the book reading, and have a great rest of your day. Keep up the fight.